Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, wherever you are. I want to welcome you to another podcast with Energy Arbitrage AI. I'm the president of Energy Arbitrage AI, Kevin Topdjian. Been in the energy and industry for almost 30 years, a long time. Today, I'm joined by Don Brohawn and Michael Greaney from the Center of Economic and Social Justice. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for giving us this opportunity.
Excellent. Well, we'll open it up for introductions. Don, maybe you can start.
If I'm introducing myself, I'm one of the co-founders of the Center for Economic and Social Justice, which was launched in 1984. So we've been around for a while, and our center is really promoting a new paradigm of economics, which largely come from the ideas of Louis Kelso, who was best known as the developer of the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, but CESJ, which was founded also by my father, Norman Kurland, and Father William Ferree. They brought together the concepts of economic and social justice coming from two different streams of thought. But the just third way, which I believe we'll be discussing today, is a synthesis of those ideas and ideas of people like Buckminster Fuller, design scientists, and we'll talk a little bit more about what our paradigm is.
Excellent. We'll dive into that, definitely.
And
after you, Michael. Yeah.
Good morning, afternoon, whichever part of the day you happen to be in at the moment.
Right.
I'm Mike Greaney. I'm CESJ's Director of Research. I'm not one of the founders, but I was pretty early. I think I came in about 1986 or 1987, about a year and a half afterwards. And after they had their presidential tax, after we had our presidential task force on Project Economic Justice, which was a bipartisan effort, believe it or not, from the U.S. Congress, and Ronald Reagan was behind it. Very supportive of it, and gave a great speech at the end of it. But then politics interfered and things kind of petered out. But we like to think that we did help contribute to the ending of the Soviet Union by at least spreading some ideas about you don't have to have concentrated ownership of capital, either in the state or in private individuals. It can be spread out the way Louis Kelso promoted with his theories of economic justice and applied practically with the invention of the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, which over the years, since I believe the first one was, Don, correct me, 1956 with Peninsula Newspapers in Monterey, California?
Yes, and that was before it was formally in the law. But I just want to mention that the Presidential Task Force was an initiative of CESJ. This was in its second year of existence, and it was largely through contacts we had. One was an Orthodox rabbi who was politically connected to someone on Capitol Hill was considered left. And the other connection we had was to a relative of Phil Crane who was considered right. And they came together on this idea, which, interestingly enough, Ronald Reagan supported. Very few people know this. And that is looking at the right to own capital as fundamental to every person, but you have to have the system and laws set up. So we have there's so much history behind this, and just the philosophy itself. And I'm sure we'll get more into detail with that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Yes. As I said, I'm Director of Research. I participated in the was it 1992 seminar we gave at the Vatican. CESJ is not a religious organization, but because one of our co-founders was a Catholic priest who was considered America's greatest social philosopher, we have tended to interact more with that particular faith than with others. And in fact, the book that Don and I co-authored, and you can get a free copy on our website, free download, or you can buy it on Amazon. Free plug. Economic Personalism was written at the behest of some officials at the Vatican who wanted a condensed version of what we're talking about to spread around. And we just recently completed a Spanish translation. It's not a religious book, it's a philosophical book with economic applications, one of which, of course, applies directly to your areas. All these great innovations in technology, AI, energy, and everything else, how are you going to finance it? And who's going to own it? And this is the whole point of what I do, my general research in. I'm more of a theoretician than do practical applications. Don is more up to speed on the practical applications and how to interact with people. I sit in my back room and ponder things and tell people what to do.
Pontificate, yeah. Well, let me jump into it. So, when people hear about Just Third Way, how do you usually explain it to someone new? And some of my audience is going to be new. They haven't heard of Just Third Way. So how do you explain that?
Well, since the Industrial Revolution and the messing up of the financial and monetary systems in the late 17th and 18th century, most people are absolutely convinced that only a small elite can own capital, the means of production. If it's the state owning, it's called socialism. Some people call it communism, but that's a semantic thing. Or if it's a small private elite, it's called capitalism. So you have the first way, which some people consider capitalism, the second way, which some people consider socialism, and then some various third ways have been brooded about, which usually end up being some sort of combination of capitalist socialism or socialist capitalism. So what we have done is say, no, there is a truly just third way based on natural law principles of justice that apply to virtually every faith and philosophy, at least within the Aristotelian and Western tradition. And that means that each and every human person has the natural right to become an owner, and therefore the natural yet socially determined application right of access to the means of becoming an owner, which means money and credit, and the right to continue possessing it, which means that the laws are structured on what you can do with what you own. And I think I'm getting a little bit too bogged down here on the technical.
That's just a high level. English. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes, and I
go ahead, Don.
Maybe just to condense what Mike said, we're looking at a different system that is it recognizes the uniqueness of every human person, and it recognizes that every human person should have fundamental rights. It also recognizes that human beings, we create institutions, including our money system, government, etc. And it's by working together with others that we can change, either create institutions or correct them when they're defective or when they exclude each of us as individuals. So the just third way is, and this is why we use the term occasionally, economic personalism. So starting with the human person. It's also, in terms of economic philosophies, as Mike was saying, it's not seeking to empower the state economically or a small elite. It is aimed at structuring all of our institutions so that they can empower every person from the day they're born to the day they die. And the key institution that we'll talk about is the money system. And there's many ways of looking at that, but we look at the fundamental meaning and purpose of money, how it's created, how it affects the innovation, the innovative process in terms of technology, but also how it connects each of us to the economy with economic power and economic independence.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. Well, before we jump into the main conversation, I want to kind of set the stage for both of you. My audience, in this conversation, it's going to explore mostly economics, right? Which we've just been discussing, technology and energy intersect, right? Between that, our listeners are kind of mostly sustainable professionals, policymakers, and innovators, right? Some founders, right? Trying to create systems that work for both people and the planet. I guess we'll talked about some of your background already, but maybe we'll get into what I'd like to hear more of is your challenges in today, right, for CSJ in energy and equity, and finally imagine what a more just sustainable economy might look like, right? So that's kind of where my questions are going to be headed. So in lieu of that, what are your current kind of priorities at CSJ, and how does your work translate the just third wave principles into action?
Yes.
And I'll open it up to either one of you.
I'll take a shot at this quickly.
Okay.
Our priorities are to enact a certain piece of legislation called the Economic Democracy Act, which would reform our monetary system, mainly the central banking and commercial banking, to open equal access to every citizen. And eventually we mean for this to be replicated throughout the world. Any country can adapt this idea. So that informing people about this new national policy, that's very much a strategic objective. The other is to present these ideas or get them more seriously considered within academia, which has largely ignored the larger concepts of Louis Kelso in terms of macroeconomics, but he basically comes out of classical economics and very much free market, limited government, private property oriented approach. So Justice University is an online educational institution we formed. We started with the concept in 2004, but started giving courses to people from around the world on what this paradigm is, its principles, theories, applications, and then what sort of institutional reforms have to take place. So that, I would say, between those two strategic initiatives of ours, that is largely what we're focused on programmatically. And I'm going to just get back to a question you said, what are our biggest challenges? We have a big idea that needs to get out to really to everyone so that they're aware of this new possibility, but getting to young leaders, young innovators, young up-and-coming politicians, so spreading the word more effectively. And I think your approach is looking at the background of your organization, your business. It struck me that you are looking at the use of AI in the way we would. It should be a tool. It should not be our master. But you either own it or you're going to be owned by it or those who do own the technology.
That's great. That's great. Now, because you mentioned it, let's jump into that. My next question. I'm going to skip one because you mentioned it right now. How do you think technology like AI, right, where my firm is, kind of focused on, could either advance or derail that mission, your mission? How can it help?
Is like money. Mm-hmm. It's either going to control you or you're going to control it. Mm-hmm. And my particular area of expertise is access to the means of acquiring and possessing private property, which means access to the monetary system. Mm-hmm. And your area of expertise is how do you get people to access to energy and be able to use it rather than it using them. And that means, just as we talk about a sustainable monetary system, you have to talk about a sustainable energy system. So that, and actually the two go together, because you can't talk about a sustainable monetary system without full participation by everyone, not just a few. And you can't talk about a sustainable energy system unless you talk about access to it by everyone. And that means everyone helping to control it in a sustainable way. In other words, you can't limit energy or money if you want them to be, they may be scarce, but that's not the same as saying that you can limit access to it. you have to make it open to access by everyone.
Yeah, and I just to add on to what Mike said, when we talk about access to money and a money system, we're looking at how it can be used effectively and in a way that empowers every person without taking away anything from those who, for example, today own and hold much of the power in the economy. So the question of who will own energy systems, new technologies, patents, all sorts of forms of productive capital is essential. At this point, we've reached a critical point in human development. And I think the question of will AI be a boon or will it destroy us, that's open-ended. We don't know. But this is the moment where we really have to say it can't be a few people or a government controlling such essential things as energy, communications, production. This is something that we can connect every human being, even a newborn, to the ownership of new capital, but it takes a money system that is used properly to bring about real production in a sustainable way, in a feasible way. So this is, one thing that I was very excited to learn a little bit about is what you do, and your emphasis on helping businesses to use AI most effectively so that their energy usage is efficient. And this, I thought, was a perfect example of how something as powerful as AI would be used correctly. And so that's something that CESJ is now really experimenting with, is how AI can help us get our message and our ideas out as effectively as possible.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, our goal is to essentially, optimize energy usage and make it more efficient while still allowing business clients, right, commercial, industrial clients, higher education, healthcare, all kinds of different clients that we represent, to use it efficiently and use more renewable energy as well on top of it. So effectively, right? So but you could use AI to do a lot of that predictive analysis. That's where I use it as a tool. So just to kind of share that for a brief moment. But this is great discussion. I mean, let me ask another question. How do we make sure these emerging technologies don't just make systems more efficient, but you've spoken about this, but more inclusive? How do you guys think? What's your opinion there? How can we make these emerging technologies more inclusive, rather than just more bring on more efficiency?
Yeah. The quick answer to me is make certain that more people own the means of energy production. In other words, back in the day when you had to chop down a tree or gather by hook or crook your fuel, it was access to that fuel that determined who had energy. And the smart landlords, the lords and aristocrats, would say, anything you can gather in my woods by hook or crook, which is where the expression comes from. In other words, if you could pull it down by a shepherd's hook or yank it with your crook, pruning hook or shepherd's crook, you could use it for fuel. This kept the land clean and avoided wildfires that you've been having out in California, because people just gathered firewood and kept it clean. So the lords could hunt and kill everything in sight, including the peasants who were running away. But in this case, what it means is that probably the closest, the best example that exists today are the electrical co-ops, where the people themselves own them. They don't control them completely because of government regulation and everything else, but that's about as close as you can come. We advocate that people should own directly and thus control, within reasonable limits, the means of production. And that means means of production of energy, which is, of course, the life's blood of any industrial economy, or actually any economy for that matter. And so personally, I think that hydrogen power is the way to go, but I can get you 99 people out of 100 will tell me why I'm wrong. But that's beside the point. My point is that if they own the means of energy generation, then they can't be cut off legally from it.
Understood.
And I just to add a little bit on to your question of how this can be, how new technology development can be more inclusive, it does have a lot to do with how you finance the creation and the commercialization of new technologies. So money, who has access to it, and how you can democratize access to it. A social tool, which is the way we look at money, is not valuable in itself. It's a set of symbols. And we really want to look at what are the goods and services that will be created for consumers to purchase. That's business has to start with that question. What can we produce that the world market will buy? So it's in access to money, that's the critical and very specific mechanism. But it also, this is one of the things that I always really appreciated about Louis Kelso, that he, and at that time his co-author Mortimer Adler, who was a famous philosopher at the time, they actually articulated a systems definition of economic justice and operating principles, one of which was what we call participative justice, or how each person can be included in the processes of the economy, not only as a consumer, but also as a producer. And if you think of how you can do that beyond just having a job or getting welfare, but how you can become, even if you have no assets, how you can become an owner of the future productive capital, that is another way for every human being to participate as a producer in the economy. And Kelso, in terms of then the distributive principle, he was looking at private property as the set of rights that an owner has over the thing he owns. The right to the fruits of whatever he owns, and the right of control. So if you can systematically connect every human being to that right of private property in something that's income producing, you can address many problems that we have, including sustainability, because I believe that there are many technologies that are on the shelf right now that could be commercialized, that would address pollution, environmental degradation, what is spurring climate change. So the capacity of technology to solve a lot of problems, I believe, is there. It's human creativity and the desire to solve problems. But it's making sure that as you do all these things, that power doesn't get concentrated. So the analogy with energy or power is that if it's concentrated, it becomes extremely dangerous. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what is the antidote to that? You can't get rid of power. You make sure you diffuse it as broadly as possible, which means to every person, which means every person needs a connection to the things that can empower them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very insightful. So let me switch this up a little. So at Energy Arbitrage AI, we're developing tools to optimize how organizations buy and use energy, right? Talked about that. One of our questions is, how can AI-based energy systems support broader social justice goals?
I'll take a shot at that, Mike, and fill in. To bring about the kind of change and systemic reforms that we're talking about, this is going to involve the tracking of how money is created, what it's used for, how it translates into ownership for each person. That's very complex. And we're going to need some really advanced systems to be able to make sure that when you, for example, a central bank like the Federal Reserve, if it changes its approach from monetizing government debt, which is every country in the world now is backing their money with their government's debt, and we shift to what the Federal Reserve was supposed to do, which was to create money as needed by the private sector to grow, whether agriculture or commercial or industrial growth. If we go back to that notion, it's in the act that formed the Federal Reserve. If we go back to that that and see how this now can be a tool for democratizing the economy, we also need to make sure our systems, the valuation systems, the regulatory to the extent that no one is cheating or stealing from the system or playing the system, but it's being used honestly for real business purposes. We're going to need more advanced systems. So I think AI and how AI can also be used in education. One sort of ironic thing is we've been testing out how AI can teach our ideas. And what we found at this stage, and we've tried different platforms, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Gemini, they are inculcated with today's conventional thinking, which we would say is wage welfare thinking. It's state capitalism, whether it's the left or the right, and it starts with the notion of you have to have past savings in order to invest in productive capital. So we had to reteach AI just to recognize what we're talking about, that there's a different approach with different assumptions. And if you start looking at the different assumptions, the array of solutions suddenly opens up. But if the AI is merely repeating what it's collecting from the internet, that's really limiting the possibilities. So if we can teach AI, and AI becomes more of a guide or a tutor or a tool for getting people to think. So not that it does the thinking for them, but it helps them to think in a clear, more systematic and principled way. I think it could be really a savior for many, many different aspects of the problems we're dealing with.
Yes, to expand on what Dawn has just said, the AI, because what they've learned from people is that, and people are shackled by this idea, that you can only do what you have done, and only people who have something can do anything. This is called, what Lewis Kelso called it, the slavery of past savings, or the slavery of savings. And this is because everyone thinks that you cannot do anything unless you already have the money to do it. In other words, you must have accumulated by overproducing in the past to have accumulated savings so that you can do something in the future. Money consists exclusively of past savings. Well, what most people don't seem to realize is that throughout history, most money that has been used to develop economically didn't come from past reductions in consumption, but from future increases in production. In other words, you're not bound by your past performance, but by your future potential, which is virtually unlimited. That's why if you look at something called Father Ferree, one of CESJ's co-founders, drew up a development curve. And as long as people relied on what they had accumulated in order to finance future growth, the development curve wasn't much of a curve, it was practically flat. The instant central banking was invented and commercial banking was reinvented about the end of the 17th century. Suddenly, people began to monetize to finance future growth with future potential rather than with past performance. And all of a sudden, the development curve shot almost straight up. Because what you can do is virtually unlimited. What you have done has already been done, and you're strictly confined by what you can do. So that, for example, how do we allocate where we build energy infrastructure? Well, if you're making the typical economic decision today, it's, well, who has enough money to pay for it? Whereas the decision which you need to program into AI is, who has the future potential to pay for it? All of a sudden, things take a different turn. And how do we turn that future potential into money now to finance the growth that will allow us to do it? And that's what Lewis Kelso's ideas helped us to do.
Right.
And to be able to
Thank you,
spread
Michael.
out the benefits, everyone should own that future potential rather than just a few people or the state.
Based on what you said about the future, I want to switch into the kind of future vision, with this. So if you imagine a future with AI tools like energy forecasting systems or decentralized grids, power grids, right? And align this with Just Third Way, what does that world look like to both of you? Kind of a 1 or 2 minute answer. Just
Within two generations, I think you would see a leveling out of the economic inequities. You'll never eliminate them. There are always going to be people who have some brilliant idea or some special ability that enables them to get much more money than anybody else. And you will always have people who, no matter what they do, they're going to fail. It just seems to happen that way. They just don't seem to mesh with life. But you can take care of that. Who cares how much money somebody else has as long as you have enough? And if somebody doesn't have enough, there'll be enough of a surplus to help them out until they get back on their feet again.
Yeah. And I would say that when you talk about decentralization of energy, I think that is something which the marketplace, if it's really operating as a truly free and open marketplace, which requires that consumers also have the power of ownership and the power of being producers, as not only consumers, then this will allow for, I would say, as optimal as possible, the creation of what is appropriate and needed. Now, I think also education. If people aren't aware of what contributes to environmental destruction, and they keep doing things in the same way they've been doing them, or using sources of energy that pollute or are limited, or the extraction is damaging to the earth, and they don't understand this, they're going to continue operating in the same way or allowing those who make decisions to keep operating in the same way. So it's not just a magic wand of technology plus money equals, the world is now a better place. We do have to look back at what are our shared values. For example, in this country, how much do we really value the dignity and sovereignty of each person? And how do our institutions reflect this? And those are important discussions to have when we talk about technology, which has the potential to liberate every human being and really protect the earth, or as much as possible do as little damage to it. So this is going to require a lot of education, sharing of information, and the power to hold those who represent us, hold them accountable, and have access to critical information. So, I think the questions you're asking are so critically needed right now that we broaden the conversation and look at really truly new approaches for answering those questions.
Great. Well, with all that, where might CESJ and areas like us at Energy Arbitrage AI collaborate? What common ground do you guys see between us?
Well, if you look at sustainability, the fixed idea that people have that first you accumulate money, then you invest it in development, and you take that profit as much as you can, as fast as you can. That is not a recipe for sustainability. What you get then is, how do I, it's like gold mining. I read once where, after somebody invented a water cannon, they were using it to take down entire hills just to get that gold ore out as fast as they possibly could to pay back their investors. Well, that's if you use past savings. If you switch to future savings, all of a sudden the mindset changes. How do I optimize profits over the long run rather than maximize them in the short run? Because if I don't have to pay back investors, then my whole mindset changes. How do I keep this going as long as possible in the most sustainable way to optimize my profits for my lifetime and my children and my grandchildren, rather than how do I get out as much as I possibly can so I can move on to the next one?
And I would say, to answer your question of where energy arbitrage and CESJ can collaborate, it's looking into the ways that new energy systems can be developed and owned by the people who use them at the very least. And that is part of the Economic Democracy Act, is how you provide access to every citizen to the money that will be needed to develop those systems, so that they can acquire shares in the companies that are going to be developing and using and commercializing those technologies. So just an interesting thing is that in Maine, we were talking with a citizens group that was looking into who should own the power grid, which was owned by two large companies in Spain. And there's been just a lot of difficulties in terms of the ownership and the policies. And so that question came up about how you could finance the purchase of these power companies, or finance the acquisition by citizens of the power grid. And that gets into technical areas which CESJ is, that's not our area of expertise, and that is yours. So I think that this is just one instance in one state where a new approach was being examined. The other, which is interesting, is that Louis Kelso, his institute, which was based in San Francisco, has opened its affiliate in Berlin through the University of Berlin. And their focus is on new energy systems and consumer ownership of new energy systems. So I think there are a lot of, and we don't even know of them. I believe that there are groups and individuals who, if we can identify and bring together to engage in collaboration and possibly use this as a model for the rest of the economy. It's when you...
Not to interrupt Don, but there is a gigantic one staring us all in the face at this very moment. Ukraine. If what has been keeping Russia going is that the Russians have believed that they have a virtual death grip on energy for Europe and other parts of the world. And Europe has been trying to wean themselves off of it. And they've succeeded in some measure, not small measure, some very large measure actually. But how are you going to keep it going? If they could completely cut themselves off from dependence on Russian, fossil fuels, and go as something sustainable, they could not only make themselves energy independent of Russia, but of any place else. And also putting this into place, something more sustainable into place in Ukraine, would also do the same thing. So that if you really want to stop a war, make it impossible for them to continue. Ukraine, of course, has been doing this in one way by targeting the refineries and oil infrastructure. But that's part of the answer. But what do you replace it with in a way that will help them rather than hurt them? Help Ukraine and the rest of Europe rather than just simply hurt Russia.
Right. Here's an interesting one. One final, I would say second to final question. If there's one thing that policymakers or tech leaders could learn from CSJ's framework right now, what would it be? If
Access to money.
Access to money.
And changing the money system that makes that possible and feasible. And when we talk about future potential, we're thinking about that in business terms, not just a wish, not just, your imagination. You do look at certain things which businesses, they do frequently, is they have to come up with business plans to convince lenders to make loans. So their past performance is important as a business, but their future markets, who they could sell to if they had more customers with money. So this, one of the important points about Kelso is that the purpose of production is consumption. And when we lose sight of that, or we ignore the fact that some people are so productive because of their ownership of hyper-productive capital versus the rest of the population, which is dependent on jobs which are being replaced by AI and robotics, you're going to have a huge imbalance, and it's bad enough right now, but it's going to get worse. And for policymakers, if they want to make citizens economically independent and not have to use the state to redistribute income and wealth, then they have to see that there's a natural way to connect people to the means of becoming a capital owner, which will be good for society. It will be good for even the government. You will have the ability to collect in taxes what is needed, what government is actually needed for, while reducing the need to use government to redistribute through welfare systems.
Welfare systems. Got it. Well, guys, this has been really insightful. Thank you for you both for this great discussion. And I guess, before we close, I want to ask if someone wants to learn more or get involved, where should they start? I assume your website. I don't know if you...
Yes. That's a very good place. That's cesj.org. Another site which we're building right now is justiceuniversity.org, and that's also where we could use experienced, skilled, knowledgeable people in creating effective learning platforms and integrating. We're actually working to use AI to help us develop curriculum. We do have in-person online courses, but we're trying to make these ideas accessible to everyone anywhere on the planet. So that is also where we need the expertise of others in many different areas.
Don, do you have these folks kind of on the CSJ payroll, and are they working for you developing the website, or are they just kind of someone externally?
The key word there is payroll. We don't have one.
Yes.
Okay.
We are all volunteer. We do, where we need certain expertise.
Well, developing a website, for instance, you brought that up. That's why I was asking.
And we do. We actually have a very good group. And I think we're at the stage where we know we have to transform how we operate as an organization. And so we've been, volunteers, our volunteers are very committed, but, we all get older. We have to bring in the new generation. And we also need to identify the best in the industries who understand that what we're doing is an important mission and work with us in a way that we all can sustain and grow together.
Perfect. Thank you both. Thank you again. Very good. You guys have a good rest of your day and afternoon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely.